So pensions have been around in the United States for a long time. And again, that's sort of the industrial age way of people thinking about retirement or taking care of themselves in an older age when they're no longer able to work at the capacity of when they were young. But one reason we have ERISA as a federal law is because pension management became corrupt and terrible, and pensions lost money, and individuals tried to retire and the money wasn't there.
What we saw recently with passage of the American Rescue Plan, just shortly after President Biden's election, was a massive bailout, a $90 billion taxpayer bailout for dozens or hundreds of these underfunded private sector pension plans around the country. And that may paper over shortfalls for a while, but unfortunately, the bailout funds didn't come with any strings attached.
Just a blank check to the struggling multi-employer pension plans through the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation and made absolutely no changes to the system at all. So I'm certain that in 10 or 15 or 20 years, we're gonna have the same problem again and taxpayers are gonna be asked to continue that bailout.
There were no obligations for these funds to do anything any differently than they have been for the past decades that got them to this place of needing a taxpayer bailout.
Is it the job of the taxpayers to bail out a private entity because they made promises they can't keep? Well, I would submit to you, no. But people have been looking at Uncle Sam for bailouts, in economic bailouts in many forms or fashions over many, many decades. It's not fair to the taxpayers, but politicians are prone to wanting to help alleviate people who make these decisions.
Politicians have an interest in promising benefits to people who are voting today, and the tab will have to be picked up by people who haven't been born yet. So that's sort of an irresistible temptation for politicians. And public sector unions are the most powerful organizations that have been able to bring this about. There's a couple of interesting sort of legal questions here about whether the contracts that are made by state and local governments about pension guarantees and things like that are legally enforceable. Are people's claims to their Social Security benefits legally enforceable? Probably not, because if push comes to shove, and if you're actually facing a sovereign bankruptcy, then these deals are going to have to be renegotiated.
Look, the unions have a history of mismanagement going all the way back to before Jimmy Hoffa. Eventually, it's at the expense of taxpayers. And for what? It's a broken system rooted in collective bargaining.
So just because there's a collective bargaining agreement that calls out a particular pension structure does not equate to good pension management and the fact that there's a guarantee for later in life. It's all about leadership and management, and there's no guarantee. There are bad actors in pension management as well as anywhere else.
The problem you have with the union pensions is you might have 100 guys participating in it, making payments into it, but over the years, you've got 200 guys pulling out.
Look, the multi-employer pension system is broken, and it's been broken for a long time. It is a bit of a Ponzi scheme, and it's sort of like Social Security, because it depends on the new people coming in to make the benefits and promises that are made to the older folks and retirees whole.
During election season, it's common to see campaign commercials championing politicians who saved worker pension plans from, well, Wall Street greed.
I drove line haul 31 years, paid into my retirement. One day I got a letter saying half was going to be taken away because of Wall Street greed. Sherrod Brown seen it was going to screw Ohio workers, and he was not going to let that happen. He said he would get this done, and he did.
I'm Sherrod Brown, and I approve this message.
To blame pension mismanagement solely on Wall Street is inaccurate.
There are rules and regulations about what you can and cannot invest pension money in. I mean, you actually have to meet a certain grade of investment, and usually they're fixed assets, or they're things that usually pay 3, 4, 5, 6%. It's no different than any other pension plan other than you have not enough going in, too much going out with construction pensions.
So instead of reforms, we're seeing a lot of pension managers getting into riskier investments, chasing higher returns.
They've got a shortfall on their books. We were assuming we would be funded if we got 8%, but we're only getting 6%, so how do we close this gap? Well, that's led many of these pension plans to, again, instead of make hard decisions about who is eligible, when you're eligible, what the benefit levels are, whether you get automatic cost of living increases or not, to ignore all of those difficult questions and just move their money into still riskier investments on the hope that those riskier investments will pay them a higher return and they will close the shortfall based on their optimistic past projections.
And when you have decades of malfeasance and poor estimates and pretending like you're going to get 10% return on investment every year because you're unwilling to hike the employer and the employee contributions to these multi-employer pension plans to make them whole, this is the system we're left with. And it's unfair to the folks who have had pensions that are guaranteed for their whole life, promised to them, to suddenly not have that anymore.
It's a doom loop, ultimately. Economic conditions always change, and the moment you hit any kind of economic headwinds, the pension fund's viability drops through the floor, and painful, difficult cuts and decisions have to be made because those in power were just kicking the can down the road instead of being prudent and responsible and not over-promising.
So this is a list of troubled pensions, just in Ohio, and they're ranked by severity. We have critical, critical and declining, and endangered, and of course, none of that is good. Let me just say this, if you are in a union pension, you might want to check on the condition of your retirement plan. Now, meanwhile, there is a solution if pension managers are willing to accept reform.
Unions typically insist on traditional pensions, what are called defined benefit plans. In other words, the union wants a guarantee that if a worker puts in X amount of time over the years and retires at age X, that employee will get a specific dollar amount as part of their pension for the rest of their life. That's not the way most of the rest of the world works now. Most of the rest of the world handles retirement using what are known as defined contribution plans. The employer will agree to put in a particular amount into a plan that is invested over time and will make whatever returns are possible given the investing conditions and choices by the plan administrators.
Let me give you a comparison. In the merit shop, open shop construction world, the typical pension is paid into by a employer-financed 401k. In a 401k that the rest of the economy has, they're highly regulated by the government so that nobody can steal the money. And so that the money is invested and the money is there for that person who pays into it. The employer pays a match, the employee pays into it, and you're vested immediately. It's your money from the first nickel. There's no waiting period, there's no 5-year or 10-year vesting that the collective bargaining agreement may have. It's yours. And if you leave that job, if for some reason your company goes out of business or you want to get a job in another state or with another contractor, you can, and you can bring that 401k with you to your new job.
So just like Social Security, there's this looming pension crisis. They're running out of money. Everyone in financial services knows that. But there is this potential solution. The challenge there, it's rooted in power and politics.
I'll pass on the pension. I'll just start a 401k in lieu of the pension, and you play into it, I'll pay into it, you'll match it, it'll get invested, it'll be portable. They'll never do that because union leadership doesn't want to give up the power and control that they have, that they get from those huge pensions.
Because pension obligations are always, by definition, paid in the future, it's easy for any employer to make a concession in negotiations that says, well, we will increase your pension benefits down the line in exchange for holding the line on wages today. And so there's always going to be pressure on employers to kick the can down the road, to make concessions in bargaining that increase pension benefits. Well, the challenge then becomes making sure that the contributions necessary to fund those benefits actually find their way into the plans. And what's happened over the decades is so many of these multi-employer plans, and remember, the unions are in on this as well. They're responsible for half the administration of these plans and for prioritizing what they ask for in bargaining. What you're seeing is these plans have not been managed well. They've not been managed prudentially. They are committing themselves to pension obligations down the road that haven't been adequately funded over time.
The pension crisis is already taking its toll, and people are looking for help even from groups and associations that have nothing to do with this union pension mess.
But I've received calls from widows, I've received calls from active members saying, can you help me, find the multi-employer pension money that's due to me, but now I'm getting pennies on the dollar because our pension plan's been taken over by the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. Can you help us? And I can't help them. I feel terrible for them. And I've had employers say, I want to leave the union. I want to decertify the union that represents us. But I've received the actuarial statements of how much it's going to cost me to leave the union because of all the union pension contributions I'm going to owe in the future. And it's more revenue than I earn in a year or 2 years. I can't do it. So we see a lot of frustrated stakeholders in this space. And the fact this was able to happen with very little critical feedback, and then also Democrats and the Biden administration bragging about it, is always just very shocking. I think the public, if they understood this issue, would be pretty shocked by it and outraged by it.
They would send out OSHA inspectors, come to a merit shop work site and cite them for the most frivolous thing. Now here's why that was important for them. Because once they cited you, you had to cease work, and you could not bid on additional state work until you cleared that citation. Well, guess what? You didn't get a hearing to clear that citation. That became so prevalent and such a part of their culture that at that point, we had a ton of contractors, merit shop contractors, who decided not to bid on it. Why? Because they didn't want to attract these inspectors on their sites to cite them for things that could have very easily just been a, hey, could you buckle down, or could you hatch that down, or could you clean that up? Instead, they turned into more formal citations to keep them from bidding.